Unaware that his wife secretly owned a $10 million bakery chain, her husband forced her to sign her bakery over to his mistress. What she did next bankrupted them. He didn't just betray her. He slid a stack of legal papers across a worn living room table, looked his wife in the eyes, and told her that if she loved him, she would sign her little bakery over to the woman standing smugly behind him. That night, Elena Marlowe's hands shook as the pen hovered above the signature line. Her husband Daniel paced the room, talking about debt collectors, legal trouble, and how Sabrina, his so-called co-worker, would handle things better. In the hallway, their elderly neighbor Ruth watched the scene through a half-open door, her heart breaking as she heard Daniel say, "You're too soft, Elena. You'll fold like you always do." He thought he was taking control. He thought he was stripping his quiet wife of the only thing she had, a bakery job he never respected, a business he believed she was too simple to understand. He thought handing everything to his mistress would finally give him the life he felt he deserved. What he never knew was this: the woman he was pressuring into signing away her small life secretly owned the entire bakery chain behind that logo. Every store, every brand right, every recipe her grandmother built. And what he had just done, in his greed, did not erase her power. It woke it up. Because while Daniel and Sabrina celebrated too early, Elena made one silent phone call to the lawyer and the accountant who knew the truth he never bothered to learn. This is not just a story about a husband who forced his wife to sign. It's about what happens when the woman you underestimate turns your signature into your sentence. The moment Elena Marlowe stepped into the main hallway of the bakery headquarters, the energy in the building shifted, only she never showed it. Workers rushed past her holding order sheets, supplier lists, and tablets with schedules. Phones rang, ovens beeped, managers called out instructions. And in the middle of it all, a quiet woman in a soft gray sweater, hair tied back, simple flats, walked through like she was just another employee. No jewelry, no title badge, no sign of power. But the sign of her power was everywhere, stamped on every box, every receipt, every coffee cup sleeve. The Hale and Hearth logo, her grandmother's logo, her logo. Elena Marlowe, 32, was the real owner of the entire Hale and Hearth bakery chain. Over a dozen stores, a central kitchen, long-term supplier contracts, and a brand valued well over $10 million. But almost nobody knew that. To most people, she was the consulting partner. To some, just Elena at the bakery. That was by design. Her grandmother, Margaret Hale, had taught her that. Margaret started with one cramped corner bakery and a handful of recipes she guarded like treasure. On nights when Elena stayed over as a teenager, Margaret would sit with her at the kitchen table, flour still dusted on her hands, and spread out handwritten plans, savings books, and sketches of future branches. One night, Margaret pressed a sealed folder into Elena's hands and whispered, "Grow it in silence. Lead from the back. People chase what they can see. Your strength must be what they cannot." When Margaret died, that folder became a roadmap. Trademarks, shell-holding companies, recipes registered in Elena's personal name, and clear instructions. Clara Benson, 45, Margaret's trusted accountant, helped Elena set everything up quietly. On paper, the operating company ran the day-to-day stores. In the background, Elena personally owned the intellectual property and brand rights. The company merely licensed it from her. In public, Clara was a retired accountant who checks in sometimes. In truth, she and Elena were the only ones who understood the full legal structure. Everyone else saw what Elena wanted them to see. "Morning, Elena." Marcy Lane, 41, senior manager and operations backbone of the chain, hurried over with a stack of printouts and her tablet. Marcy knew more than most. She knew Elena was not just a consultant, but still respected the cover story. To staff, she simply called Elena our silent partner from the Hale family. "Last week's numbers," Marcy said, slightly out of breath. "We hit another milestone. 3 branches sold out of pastries 2 days in a row, and the central kitchen efficiency went up again." Elena smiled softly and signed off on the report with the title she always used in public. Elena Hale Marlowe, consulting partner. "Great work, Marcy," she said. "Keep leading them the way you are. They trust you." Marcy's stern face softened. They trust you more than you think, even if they don't know who you really are. Elena just gave a small smile and didn't answer. At the end of the corridor stood a dark wooden door with a keyed lock and a small brass plate that simply read, Archives. Employees assumed it held old paperwork and nothing more. Elena's gaze lingered on that door. Behind it were the originals. The first deed for the flagship store, trademark certificates in her personal name, licensing agreements, her grandmother's letter, the file Clara helped her build, everything that made the chain hers, even if she vanished from the building for months. Only 3 people knew this fully: Elena, Marcy, and Clara. Daniel, her husband, knew only what he bothered to ask, which wasn't much. Years ago, Elena tried to explain the structure to him. He waved it off, called it complicated paperwork, and decided she just had a nice stake in some bakery business. He never asked what "some" really meant. He never asked whose name was on the trademarks. He never clicked past the surface. He believed she was a woman with a cute job, not a woman with a quiet empire. Elena finished her walkthrough and headed out early. Staff nodded to her in the hallway, polite but casual. To them, she was important, but not central, and that had always comforted her. She liked being the person who could wipe flour off a counter and sign a $1 million supplier contract in the same day without anyone treating her differently. As she drove home, the late afternoon light turned golden over the city. Her hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, but her mind was busy. She thought about Daniel, about how he had seemed distant lately, more secretive, more defensive, his texts shorter, his explanations vaguer. He had never been deeply interested in the bakery, but recently he had started asking odd questions. How long could that place survive without shipments? Do you ever sign anything without reading every page? Do they, need your personal name on everything? She'd laugh them off then. Now, alone in the car, they tugged at her nerves. When she pulled into the driveway, Ruth Carter, 70, her elderly neighbor, sat on her front porch in her usual faded armchair, knitting something pale blue. Ruth watched people the way some people watch the news. She had seen Elena graduate, marry, build the bakery, and slowly dim in that same house. When Elena stepped out of the car, forcing a small smile, Ruth's eyes narrowed. She saw the tiredness in the younger woman's face. "You're carrying too much in that heart, Elena," Ruth said gently. Elena tried to laugh it off. "Just work. It's busy." Ruth shook her head. "Work doesn't make your shoulders sag like that. People do." Elena swallowed hard, the words hitting too close. Inside the house, Daniel Marlowe, 35, was sprawled on the couch, TV on, phone in hand. He barely glanced up. "You're back late," he muttered. "Your little bakery keeping you hostage again?" Little. He always called it that. She set her bag down carefully. "We were reviewing performance reports." Daniel snorted. "You're wasting yourself there. You could have done something bigger if you listened to me." He didn't ask about her day, didn't ask why she seemed quieter than usual. He never wondered what bigger might actually already be sitting under his roof. Later, when Elena stepped outside to bring in the trash can, Ruth caught her again with a soft, serious look. "You give too much," Ruth murmured. "One day, if you're not careful, someone's going to take advantage of it." Elena's hand tightened on the handle of the bin. A shiver slipped down her spine. Ruth added almost in a whisper, "And when he starts bringing new people around, watch their smiles. The wrong ones never reach their eyes." Elena managed a small nod, not realizing that Ruth had just described the woman who would soon stand behind her husband with a pen and a plan. The intensity hit Elena the moment she walked into Gavin's apartment that weekend. Daniel had said, "It's just a small gathering. Gavin invited some people from work. And I want you there. You're so serious lately." He'd said it with a soft laugh, trying to sound casual, but as soon as she stepped through the doorway, she understood something was wrong. Laughter, music, and the smell of food filled the open-plan living room. People chatted in clusters, glasses in hand. On the surface, it looked normal, but across the room, near the balcony doors, stood Daniel, and a woman Elena had never seen before. They stood too close. The woman leaned in, saying something near his ear. Daniel smiled in a way Elena hadn't seen in months. Easy, unguarded, alive. His body angled toward the woman, not away. Her hand brushed his wrist like she'd done it 100 times already. Elena felt the air leave her chest for a second. Gavin Pierce, 33, Daniel's longtime friend, noticed her standing in the doorway and walked over quickly. Usually loud and teasing, tonight his smile was tight. "Hey, Elena," Gavin said, forcing cheerfulness. "Glad you made it." She glanced past him toward Daniel and the woman. "Who's that?" Elena asked quietly. Gavin hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "That's Sabrina Cole," he said. "She's been helping Daniel with a project at work." Helping. It sounded harmless. It didn't look harmless. The woman turned as if she felt Elena's eyes on her. She smiled brightly and walked over with the smooth confidence of someone used to being noticed. Up close, Sabrina Cole, 29, was carefully put together. Hair perfectly curled, lipstick flawless, nails manicured. Her dress fit like it was tailored. She carried herself like she belonged in any expensive room. "Hi," Sabrina said, extending a hand. "You must be Elena. Daniel's told me about you." Elena took her hand. "Nice to meet you." Sabrina's gaze slid down Elena's simple blouse and jeans, then back up. The smile stayed, but something sharp passed through her eyes. "So," Sabrina said, tilting her head, "Daniel says you help out at a bakery?" It was the slight pause before help that stung. The deliberate smallness. Elena answered simply, "Yes, I work with my family's bakery business." "Oh, that's cute," Sabrina said with a light laugh. "I love people who follow their little passions." Cute. Little. Daniel didn't correct her. He didn't say, "She runs the place." He didn't say, "She's more than you think." He just wrapped an arm loosely around Elena's shoulders, the motion mechanical, like he realized people were watching. "Don't scare her off, Sabrina," he joked. "Elena's shy." There was no warmth in the way he said her name. Across the room, Gavin watched them with a clenched jaw. He took a sip of his drink, then set it down untouched. His eyes flicked between Elena's face, Daniel's forced smile, and Sabrina's easy intimacy. Dinner blurred by in small details Elena couldn't ignore. Sabrina touching Daniel's arm when she laughed. Daniel leaning in too close when she spoke. A shared look when someone mentioned big plans and new ventures. Sabrina mentioning late nights at the office and catching up on numbers together. Every small thing could be innocent. Together they weren't. At one point, Sabrina came up to Elena with 2 glasses. "I brought you water," she said sweetly. "Daniel said you don't really drink." Elena accepted the glass. "Thank you." Sabrina took a slow sip of her own drink, then said lightly, "You must be proud of him. He talks about wanting to do something big. Really big." Elena kept her tone calm. "We've both worked hard for what we have." Sabrina's lips curved. "Of course, but some people are meant to outgrow small spaces, you know?" The words were innocently phrased, the meaning was not. Later that night back home, Elena carried the weight of those conversations like stones in her chest. Daniel dropped his keys on the table and kicked off his shoes. "Fun night, right?" he said. She began picking up his discarded jacket and shirt from the bedroom floor. Habit, automatic, familiar. When she lifted his shirt, the scent hit her first. Perfume, sweet, expensive, not hers. Her heart pounded. Her hands began to shake as she lifted the collar. A faint, blurred lipstick mark stained the inside edge. Her vision tunneled for a moment. She didn't scream. She didn't storm into the living room. She didn't throw the shirt at him and demand answers. She folded it once, then tucked it beneath other clothes in the laundry basket where he wouldn't see she'd noticed. She needed to think, not react. In the dim hallway, leaning back against the wall, her mind replayed the night. Sabrina's cute, Daniel's silence, Gavin's tight expression, the way Sabrina had said big plans. Ruth's voice from days earlier echoed in her memory. When he starts bringing new people around, watch their smiles. The wrong ones never reach their eyes. Elena's throat tightened. She stepped outside onto the small front porch to breathe. The street was quiet, washed in yellow from the streetlights. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. She hesitated, then opened the message. You need to watch him. She's not who you think. Her stomach dropped. She typed back quickly. Who is this? No reply. Her heart hammered in her ears. Another message arrived. You saw her tonight. Don't trust the story they told you. Elena swallowed, her fingers trembling, not from confusion, but from confirmation. Someone else had seen what she saw. Someone who didn't want to put their name to it yet. Her phone buzzed again. Check the accounts. This time she didn't answer. She didn't need to ask which accounts. She knew exactly which ones they meant. The intensity struck Elena before dawn. Her phone rang early, slicing through the quiet bedroom. Daniel slept beside her, turned away, breathing evenly, as if his world were perfectly fine. She slid out of bed carefully and answered in the hallway. Elena, it's Marcy, came the tense voice. I need to ask you something. Did you approve changing the payment instructions for our main supplier? Elena frowned. No, I haven't touched any payment settings this week. Why? Marcy exhaled heavily. Because the system shows a management override from an account linked to your household email, the one Daniel sometimes uses when he logs in to help. The unknown text from last night flashed in her mind. Check the accounts. Elena walked quietly into the small home office and sat down, heart racing but voice steady. Send me a screenshot, she said. Minutes later, the screenshot arrived. There it was, her admin panel, an override she hadn't made. A rerouted payment tagged with a note. Temporary change, expansion support. The user ID tied back to the secondary login she had set years ago, so Daniel could feel connected. He'd said, just in case you ever need me to jump in for you. She'd thought it was harmless, a gesture of trust. Elena, Marcy's voice came through again. Do you want me to reverse it? No, Elena said quietly. Not yet. Don't change anything until I say so. And don't mention this to anyone else. Not even Daniel. Especially not Daniel. Marcy paused. You think he... I don't know what I think yet, Elena replied, but I need to see the whole picture. After they hung up, Elena stared at the screen, her chest tight. Perfume on his shirt, lipstick on the collar, a strange co-worker, a secret message warning her. Now, her business accounts being touched without her consent. The pattern was no longer a coincidence. It was a line. Later that day at the central kitchen, Elena tried to hide the strain on her face as she moved through the warehouse office. She checked inventory logs, scanning for anything else that didn't match. The metal door creaked open behind her. Milo Hart, 27, a quiet delivery driver who had been with Hale and Hearth for years, stepped in. He rarely spoke unless necessary. Today his hands shook slightly as he held a small padded envelope. Elena, can I talk to you? He asked. She turned, softening her expression for him. Of course. What is it? He swallowed hard. I didn't mean to snoop. I was filming the loading area for stock verification. I have this habit of recording video so I don't get blamed if something goes missing. He gave a nervous smile that faded quickly. But when I checked the footage yesterday, Milo continued, I saw something I couldn't ignore. I printed a still for you. He handed her the envelope. Inside was a photo printed on office paper. The frozen frame of his video. Daniel, Sabrina, behind the loading dock, kissing like they had forgotten the world still existed. Daniel's hand rested on her lower back. Sabrina's fingers were hooked in his shirt. Elena stared at the image. The world didn't spin. It didn't collapse. It just narrowed. Milo rushed to explain. I know it's not my place, but you've always treated us fair. You know our names. You send food to my mom when she's sick. I couldn't just pretend I didn't see this. His eyes were wet with guilt. Elena forced herself to breathe evenly and managed to whisper, Thank you, Milo. You did the right thing. He nodded quickly and left, closing the door gently behind him. She sat down slowly, the photo in her hand. Her throat burned. Her eyes stung, but no tears fell yet. On the desk, her phone lit up with a calendar reminder she had set months ago. Review staff bonuses with Daniel? She almost laughed. The bitterness of it hurt. That evening, when she returned home, Daniel was in the living room, one leg over the arm of the couch, scrolling his phone. "How was your day?" she asked, standing in the doorway, watching him closely. He didn't look up. "Busy. Sabrina and I are trying to fix some numbers at the office. She'd be lost without me." She waited. "Anything unusual?" "Nope," he said lightly. "Just work." The lie slid out so smoothly, it chilled her. She studied him as if he were a stranger she was meeting for the first time. How had she missed this side of him for so long? A memory rose from years back. Her grandmother on the porch, Elena's hands in hers. The person who takes your honesty for granted will one day test just how much you're willing to lose for love. Elena had thought Margaret was just being dramatic. Now, watching her husband lie to her face, she understood. Later, as the shower ran and steam fogged the bathroom door, Elena walked into the study. Daniel's laptop sat open on the desk. He usually closed it. Tonight, he must have forgotten. Her heart pounded, but her hand was steady as she touched the trackpad. She opened his email. At first, it was small things, inside jokes with coworkers, threads about office gossip. Then a folder caught her eye. New ownership plan. She clicked. Emails flooded the screen. Transfer of ownership proposal. Draft. Sabrina's plan for expansion. Once she signs, we'll clean house. She trusts you. Use that. Her eyes burned as she read a line that felt like a knife. She'll sign. She's too soft to fight back. She covered her mouth with her hand, a choke sound escaping her. One hot tear slipped out, falling onto the keyboard. In their bedroom, the shower turned off. Elena closed the emails, wiped her eyes, and shut the laptop quietly. She walked out of the room before he could see her shaken. When she passed the mirror in the hallway, she barely recognized herself. Soft? Maybe. Easy to break? Not anymore. As she turned off the light, a thought crystallized, cold and sharp. If he wanted a signature from the woman he thought would never fight, he was about to find out who he had really married. The intensity slammed into Elena the moment she walked into the living room the next evening. Daniel wasn't lounging on the couch. The TV wasn't on. The house was too quiet. He stood by the coffee table in a pressed shirt, jaw tight, eyes restless. On the table sat a thick stack of documents in a neat pile. Lydia Marlowe, 58, his mother, sat on the armchair like a judge waiting to deliver a sentence. Her expression was tight, lips pursed, eyes full of blame. Elena stopped in the doorway. "What's going on?" Daniel picked up the papers and slapped them lightly back down, as if to show their importance. "We have a problem," he said, "a serious one." Lydia crossed her arms. "And of course, you're not here when real issues happen. Always at that little bakery job." Elena frowned. "We aren't behind on our bills. I checked everything this morning." "This isn't about household bills," Daniel snapped. "It's bigger. I tried to shield you, but it's too late." A knot formed in her stomach. "Shield me from what?" He gestured to the papers. "I got mixed up in an investment that went bad. There are legal threats. They could freeze our accounts. If they see your name tied to the bakery, they might drag your family business into it too." Her mind raced. He was mixing just enough truth with lies to make it sound plausible. She knew financial trouble could get ugly fast. But then he said, "I talked to someone who knows business, Sabrina. She's helping me clean this up." Elena's eyes darkened. "You talked to Sabrina about our finances?" "She's smart, Elena. Smarter about these things than you are," Lydia snapped. "She understands business. You just bake bread." Before Elena could answer, the doorbell rang. Daniel moved quickly to open it. Sabrina stepped in, dressed sharply, carrying a slim folder and a professional expression. Her tone was soft, sympathetic. "Elena," Sabrina said, "I'm so sorry. Daniel told me what's happening. I came to help. I've handled asset transfers before. I brought the forms we need. No coworker should be this involved. No friends should be present for this conversation." Sabrina sat on the far side of the coffee table, opposite Elena, and opened her folder. The papers inside matched the ones on the table. "Right now," Sabrina explained, "the best way to protect what you have is to move ownership of the bakery business away from your personal name, temporarily. We put it in a neutral name, mine, just until the noise settles. Otherwise, creditors might see your interest and come for it." Lydia nodded firmly. She's offering a solution. You should be grateful. Elena looked down at the first page. Transfer of operating control and equity interest. The language was dense but familiar. Years at the bakery had forced her to read contracts. She recognized fragments she'd seen in older drafts, almost as if someone had taken a template and crudely edited it. She noticed something else. Her middle name was spelled wrong in 2 places. Her grandmother's initials on a reference clause were mistyped. Sloppy, rushed, not done by someone who truly knew the company. She filed that away in her mind. "Why Sabrina?" Elena asked quietly. "Why not a lawyer? Why not Clara?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because we don't have time or money for lawyers. Clara's old-fashioned. Sabrina knows modern business. This is temporary. I need you to trust me." He softened his voice, reaching across the table. "If you love me, you'll sign," he said. "If you don't, we both go down. They'll drag the bakery in. You could lose everything. Is that what you want?" Lydia leaned forward, voice sharp as glass. "You have no idea what your hesitation is doing to my son. He's carrying the weight of this family. You play around with cakes all day. The least you can do is sign and let people who understand business fix it." The lie was carefully layered. Fear, urgency, guilt, and a fake solution. Elena's chest hurt. Not because she believed the story, but because she could see how far they were willing to go to manipulate her. Sabrina slid a pen across the table, her fingers brushing Daniel's hand in a small, intimate gesture she probably thought Elena wouldn't notice. "This is the smart move," Sabrina murmured. "I promise I'll handle things carefully. We'll transfer it back once this settles." Elena lifted her eyes to Sabrina's. In that moment, beneath the thin veil of concern, she saw something else. Greed, confidence, victory, almost. She understood then. They believed the same thing Daniel had written in that email. "She'll sign. She's too soft to fight back." Her grandmother's voice rose in her memory. "Your kindness will be your gift, but one day someone will try to turn it into your cage." Daniel pushed the papers closer. "Elena," he said, his tone now hard, "we are out of time. Either you sign or we all face ruin. You included. Divorce lawyers, investigations. Do you really want our whole life in a courtroom?" He wasn't just using fear. He was using her horror of public shame, of mess, of chaos. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. Not because she believed him, not because she accepted the story, but because she suddenly understood. She needed this moment documented. She needed this pressure recorded in her memory for someone else to hear later. She signed. Her name flowed across the page, the sound of the pen scratching against paper impossibly loud in her ears. Daniel exhaled in relief, shoulders dropping. Lydia smiled triumphantly. Sabrina leaned back, crossing her legs, eyes gleaming. As Elena set the pen down, Sabrina leaned in. Just enough that only Elena could hear the whisper, "I told him you'd fold." For a second, time stopped. Elena's fingers curled slowly away from the pen. She lifted her eyes and met Sabrina's. And something inside her, something that had been bruised and quiet for months, stood up. Not outwardly, not yet, but firmly. She looked at the signature, at the wrong middle name, at the sloppy clauses, at the woman sitting across from her, who thought this was the end of the story. Elena calmly pushed the papers back toward Daniel. "Take them," she said softly. He grabbed them with shaking hands, already talking about next steps and crisis averted. Lydia started praising Sabrina, talking about how efficient and business-minded she was. They all moved. Elena didn't. She sat very still on the edge of the couch, eyes distant, heart no longer breaking, but hardening. They thought she had folded. They thought this was over. They had no idea the woman they just cornered had someone waiting on the other end of a phone call who knew exactly how to undo coercion. The intensity hit Elena the moment the front door closed behind Daniel and Sabrina. Their voices faded down the walkway, still discussing strategy and next moves, like she was an obstacle they'd finally moved out of the way. The lock clicked. Silence swallowed the house. The signed document sat on the table, edges slightly curled, ink still fresh. They seemed to glow in the dim light, mocking her. Her chest tightened. The room blurred at the edges. She picked up the stack with both hands, fingers digging into the paper, as if she could crush it back into blank sheets. All the strength she'd been holding on to snapped. She dropped to her knees on the living room floor, the papers scattering around her like fallen leaves. The first sob tore out of her before she could stop it. Then another, and another. She pressed her forehead against the carpet, shoulders shaking. All the hurt she'd been collecting inside poured out. The way Daniel dismissed her work, the perfume on his shirt, the lipstick mark, the unknown texts, the secret emails, the staged fear, the whisper, "I told him you'd fold." Why? She choked into the floor. Why would you do this to me? For a long time, minutes, maybe longer, she didn't move. The house felt colder, bigger, emptier than it had ever felt. Her tears finally slowed to soft, uneven breaths. A soft knock echoed at the door. Gentle, not demanding, not rushed. Elena didn't respond. The door opened slowly anyway. Ruth had a spare key Daniel never bothered to remember existed. Years ago, Elena gave it to her for emergencies. Ruth stepped inside, her old cardigan wrapped around her, eyes instantly taking in the scene. Elena on the floor, papers everywhere, cheeks wet, eyes hollow. Ruth didn't say, "What happened?" She didn't say, "It'll be okay." She walked over, lowered herself to the floor with a slow, careful motion, and sat beside Elena. Her knees popped. She winced, then placed a warm, wrinkled hand on Elena's back. That simple touch broke whatever walls were left. Elena sobbed again, quieter now, leaning toward Ruth like a ship leaning toward a lighthouse. After a long silence, Ruth spoke, her voice low and steady. "Don't let them write your ending, Elena," she whispered. "You pick up the pen. You write it yourself." Elena's fingers tightened around a page near her hand. She lifted her head and wiped her face clumsily. "I signed," she whispered, voice broken. "I signed it, Ruth. I let him take everything my grandmother built." Ruth shook her head gently. "You let nothing," she said. "You survived a moment you were never supposed to face alone. That's different." The words sank deep. Slowly, the storm inside Elena began to quiet. Not because the pain disappeared, but because something clearer shifted in its place. Resolve. She sat up, gathering the papers into a pile again, this time not like a victim holding the evidence of her loss, but like a woman handling evidence of a crime. "Ruth," she said softly, "I think he used fear and lies to make me sign." Ruth nodded. "Then you find someone whose job is to notice that." Elena stood, legs trembling, but back straighter. She walked to the sideboard where she kept old files and opened a narrow drawer. There, tucked between old receipts and a faded photograph of her and Margaret, was an old business card. Clara Benson, financial consultant, her grandmother's accountant, the woman who helped her set up the structure years ago. They had drifted to infrequent calls when things ran smoothly, but Elena had never gotten rid of the card. She dialed with shaking fingers. "Hello," came Clara's familiar, warm voice. "Clara, it's Elena," she said, breathing hard. "I think I made a mistake. Or they made me make one." "What happened?" Clara's tone sharpened instantly. "They made me sign over the bakery," Elena said, voice trembling. "Or at least they said I did. They said creditors would come after us. They said putting it temporarily in someone else's name would protect it." "They?" Clara asked. "My husband, and a woman he calls his co-worker." There was a short pause on the line. "Elena," Clara said carefully, "do you still have the paperwork?" "Yes, I've got every page." "Good," Clara replied. "Don't destroy anything. Don't give anyone copies. And listen to me very closely. Your grandmother did not build your inheritance in a way that one signature could erase it." Elena blinked, tears filling her eyes again. But this time, they were different. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "Your grandmother insisted that every recipe, every design, every brand mark, every piece of intellectual property be placed in your personal name," Clara explained. "The operating company, Hale and Hearth Foods Limited, only licenses those rights from you. That's what makes your structure unique." Elena tried to steady her breathing. So even if I sign something transferring company shares or management, you didn't sign away your identity, Clara said firmly. You didn't sign away the trademarks. And if they pressured you emotionally without independent legal advice, that contract is vulnerable. Ruth squeezed Elena's hand tightly. Clara continued, I'm connecting you to a lawyer I trust, Jerome Howe. He understands this kind of case. He'll need to know exactly what they said and how they said it. Don't downplay anything. Within minutes, Elena was on another call. Mrs. Marlowe, came a calm, grounded male voice. This is Jerome Howe. Clara briefed me. I'm going to ask you something simple but important. Did you feel you had a real choice when you signed those documents? Elena looked at the table, remembering Daniel's threat about debt, Lydia's accusations, Sabrina's help. The pen pushed toward her. No, she said. They told me if I didn't sign, we'd lose everything. They made it sound like refusing would destroy us both. Were you given a chance to get independent legal advice before signing? Howe asked. No, Elena replied. They said we didn't have time or money. Jerome's voice deepened with quiet certainty. Then what they have, he said, is not a clean contract, it's evidence. Elena's heart thudded. He went on. We can challenge it on grounds of coercion and misrepresentation. And because of how your grandmother set things up, we can use your trademark ownership as leverage. But I'll need every detail, and we'll need proof of what they were planning. Elena glanced around at the scattered papers, the laptop in the other room, the text messages, the screenshot from Marcy, the photo from Milo. Proof was all around her, waiting to be gathered. Can you fight this? She whispered. With your cooperation and honesty, Jerome replied, yes, and when we're done, the people who thought they took everything from you may find themselves bankrupt instead. Ruth watched Elena as her posture changed, shoulders more squared, eyes more focused. For the first time since this began, Elena felt something rising inside her that had nothing to do with fear. Power. Before ending the call, Jerome added, one more thing. Tomorrow, if you can, check which names appear on the bank accounts connected to your company. It will show you how long they've been planning this. Elena's gaze drifted toward Daniel's closed office door. She knew, with a steady, quiet certainty, that the night she broke on the floor was not the end of anything. It was the night she stopped crying over what they did to her and started planning what she was going to do next. The intensity struck before dawn. Elena sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers that had once felt like protection and now felt like weapons. Bank statements, supplier logs, email printouts, the contract she'd been forced to sign. But the real change in the room wasn't on the table. It was in her eyes. Her eyes were still gentle, but no longer soft, no longer naive. A cold, precise focus had taken root there. Her phone buzzed with an incoming video call. Mrs. Marlowe? Jerome Howe, 52, appeared on the screen. His dark-rimmed glasses and tired eyes suggested he'd been up as long as she had. I've reviewed the documents you sent. Elena leaned forward. Can we fight this? We already are, he said. I've spoken with Clara. Your grandmother's structure is unusually smart. Because the intellectual property sits in your personal name, they cannot operate your brand without you. But to fully expose what Daniel and Sabrina did, we'll need more than papers. He glanced off screen, then looked back. That's why I asked someone to join us. A second face appeared in a separate window. Jonas Reed, 38. Quiet eyes, trimmed beard, a scar near his temple that hinted at a rougher life than his calm voice suggested. Mrs. Marlowe, Jonas said politely, I'm a licensed private investigator. Your lawyer believes your case involves not just coercion, but a pattern of financial misconduct and premeditated fraud. The words were sharp, heavy, but somehow stabilizing. Fraud. Not mistake, not misunderstanding. Can you prove it? Elena asked softly. That's my job, Jonas replied, and you've already helped. The email screenshots, the picture from your employee, the contract, they're all threads. I just need to pull them together. Jonas will focus on three things, and Jerome explained. 1, tracing any shell companies linked to Sabrina and Daniel. 2, mapping money transfers from your business to their personal accounts. 3. Documenting their behavior and intent. Jonas held up a thin manila folder to the camera. I did a fast preliminary search last night. I found this. He opened it and read. Sabrina Cole registered a company 3 months ago. Cole Holdings and Development. No staff, no office, no website. But the business description? He gave a small, humorless smile. Food product management, licensing and supply contracts. And the initials, he added. CHD, very close to Hale and Hearth Distribution's old abbreviation. That's not an accident. Elena's jaw tightened. Your husband has already signed 2 small contracts in favor of Cole Holdings, Jonas continued. They look like consulting fees from your operating company. Small amounts but repeated. Classic siphoning behavior. Her heart ached, not from surprise anymore, but from clarity. Later that afternoon, Elena stood in the back office of the headquarters, the walls lined with shelves of binders and flower blueprint maps. Marcy Lane, 41, and Clara Benson, 45, sat at the desk with laptops open. Clara's brow furrowed in concentration. I ran a deeper search through the internal financial system, she said. Daniel started shifting small amounts of money 6 months ago. Maintenance, consulting, system upgrades, always just under the threshold that would require a second approval. She slid a printed sheet toward Elena. The total at the bottom wasn't enough to bankrupt the chain, but it was enough to scream betrayal. He used my name as cover, Elena whispered, because my signature makes it all look clean. Marcy's hands were clenched into fists on the table. Her face was red with restrained anger. Elena, that's not all, Marcy said. I searched archived emails on our central server. These weren't meant for us to see, but he wasn't as careful as he thought. She handed over another page. Elena read, once the bakery is in Sabrina's name, we rebrand the staff. New culture, no dead weight. Long-timers are a liability. Under that, another line. She's attached to them. We're not. Elena's throat tightened. He hadn't just been planning to take the business away from her. He had been planning to erase the people she cared about. Tears burned behind her eyes but didn't fall. These people, she said slowly, worked through holidays, through storms, through supply shortages. They stayed when it was hard. They stayed because of you, Marcy said, not because of him. As Elena left the office to get some air in the hallway, Ellie Carter, 24, a young staff member with flowers still dusting her apron, approached nervously. Elena? Ellie said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. I heard you were here. I needed to tell you something. Elena softened her expression. Go ahead. Ellie twisted her hands together. I stayed late last week to close up. I heard Daniel talking to Sabrina near the office door. He said, once this bakery is in your name, we finally get money worth having. Real money. Elena's stomach clenched. Ellie swallowed. He sounded excited, Elena. Not worried, not scared. Excited, like he'd won something. Elena inhaled slowly, fighting the ache in her chest. Thank you, Ellie, she said, for telling me. It matters more than you know. That evening, the kitchen table at Elena's house became a war room. Jonas spread out printed bank logs and photographs. Clara highlighted key entries in neon yellow. Marcy brought internal records. Jerome appeared again on video, taking notes. I've mapped the timeline, Jonas said, tapping the folder. Affair, money siphoning, shell company creation, supplier reroute attempt, forced contract. All of it forms a pattern. He looked at Elena directly. These aren't people who made a mistake, he said. These are people who bet on you breaking. Elena looked at everything, every page, every timestamp, every ugly truth revealed. She closed the folder slowly. We won't scream, she said quietly. We won't argue. We won't throw things. Everyone watched her. We'll let them keep doing exactly what they're doing, she continued. And when the right eyes are watching, they'll bury themselves. The room went still. In that silence, everyone finally understood. They were not just helping a wounded woman fight back. They were standing behind a woman who had finally remembered exactly who she was. The intensity began before sunrise. At 6 a.m., the sky still dim, Elena sat at the kitchen table again. this time not surrounded by messy evidence, but by organized folders marked with colored tabs. Her laptop glowed in front of her. On the screen, Jerome's calm face appeared once more. "Today is the first visible move," he said. "Once we pull this trigger, the situation can't go back to quiet. Are you ready?" Elena thought of her grandmother's hands guiding hers over dough, of Milo's trembling voice, of Ellie's courage, of Ruth's steady eyes. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready," Jerome nodded. "Then we start with what they never respected, the paperwork." On his instruction, Elena opened a drafted notice labeled, "Notice of Trademark and License Enforcement." "This document," Jerome explained, "goes to every supplier and partner who uses your brand. It states that any change in control not personally approved by you violates their licensing terms. It instructs them to halt shipments and payments to any party not recognized by your original agreements." Elena read the key line out loud. "Any use of the Hale and Hearth brand, recipes, or likeness outside authorized license from Elena Hale Marlowe is considered a breach and must cease immediately." Her index finger hovered over the trackpad. She clicked to send. Instantly, dozens of emails left the outbox, flying towards suppliers, partners, and regional distributors. At the same time, Clara sent a second wave from the company's accounting system. "Request, freeze, and review transactions related to Cole Holdings and Development." "The banks already have flags on those accounts," Clara said from the other end of the call. "Your husband got away with maintenance for months. He's not getting away with this." Across town in a warehouse office, Dorian Blake, 50, longtime supplier and old friend of Margaret, opened the notice and frowned. His phone rang almost immediately. "Dorian?" Elena said. "Little Hale," he replied, using the old nickname he had for her since she'd been a teenager stacking flour bags. "I just saw the notice. What's going on?" Elena's voice was calm but honest. "Someone tried to take what doesn't belong to them. I'm pulling the brand back where it legally sits." Dorian didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "Say the word," he said. "Until I hear directly from you, nothing with your logo leaves my warehouses to any new name. I owe your grandmother that much. And I owe you." "Thank you," Elena whispered. The first domino fell. By mid-morning, the effects hit Sabrina's world first. At the busiest branch, Sabrina strutted in wearing a blazer and heels, ready to check on things. She liked to be seen as the new power, a role Daniel had quietly promised her. Instead, she found empty shelves, half-finished trays, and worried faces. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why isn't the display full? We have customers waiting." Ellie, 24, stood behind the counter, hands folded, trying to stay calm. "We ran out of flour and sugar," Ellie said. "The delivery didn't arrive. Dorian's team refused to unload without written authorization from Elena." Sabrina blinked, her composure cracking. "What?" "There was also something about trademark enforcement," Ellie added carefully. "They said only Elena can approve shipments now, in writing." Sabrina's heart slammed against her ribs. Trademark, enforcement, Elena's name. She stormed into the back office and called Daniel with shaking hands. "Daniel?" she snapped the second he answered. "The suppliers are refusing shipments. They say some trademark notice came from Elena." "She can't do that," Daniel said. "She doesn't have that kind of authority." His sentence cut off as his phone buzzed aggressively with notification after notification. He pulled it away from his ear. Alert. Transaction blocked due to suspected fraud. Alert. Account activity under review. Notice. Temporary hold on outgoing transfers. "Daniel!" Sabrina shouted. "What is happening?" He stared at his screen as if it were turning into a weapon in his hands. "It's the bank," he said slowly. "They've frozen the accounts. Someone reported irregular transfers." He thought of Clara, of Elena's calm eyes the last few nights, of the way she'd gone so quiet. Panic crept into his voice. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "She's never pushed back before. She always just folds?" Sabrina cut in bitterly. "You said that, remember? She'll fold. She doesn't understand business." Daniel didn't answer, because for the first time he wasn't sure he understood her at all. Back at headquarters, Clara sat beside Elena, refreshing financial dashboards. Another attempted transfer blocked, Clara reported. They're trying to move what's left. Let them keep trying, Elena said. Every attempt will be logged. Every log is evidence. On a separate window, Jerome watched, noting timestamps. This pattern makes our case stronger, he said. They're showing intent to hide money even after notice. Judges don't like that. By late afternoon, Daniel stormed into the branch office where Sabrina sat surrounded by invoices and panicked staff. You told me this was safe, Sabrina yelled, shoving a stack of notices at him. You said she wouldn't fight. You said she didn't even know how the contracts worked. Daniel's jaw clenched. Stop screaming. We just need to push back. We'll get a lawyer. We, she spat. You dragged me into this. You said I'd be the new owner. He grabbed his hair, pulling at it in frustration. Before he could answer, a man in a plain jacket and a neutral expression stepped into the doorway. Daniel Marlowe, he asked. Daniel turned warily. Yes? The man handed him a heavy envelope. You've been served. Inside was not just a bank investigation notice. It was the beginning of something far worse. A formal civil suit. Fraud, misrepresentation, coercion, plaintiff, Elena Hale Marlowe. This is a mistake, Daniel stammered, flipping through the pages. Sabrina snatched a copy, her face draining of color as she read. Elena is taking us to court, she whispered, disbelief and fear mixing in her voice. You told me she couldn't even stand up for herself. At that same moment, miles away, in a quiet kitchen filled with the smell of cooling bread, Elena closed her laptop. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't thrown anything. And yet, on the other side of the city, everything they had built on lies was beginning to shake. Tomorrow, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else, we take this out of the shadows. The storm was no longer just legal documents and blocked accounts. The storm was headed for court. The intensity exploded the next morning. Daniel walked into the main branch expecting chaos, and got it. Customers crowded near the counter, waving receipts and raising their voices. This is ridiculous, one shouted. You changed everything and now nothing works. I came here because of the old staff, another said. You replaced people and now you can't even keep the shelves full. Behind the counter, the trays were nearly empty. The few pastries they had left looked rushed. Sabrina stood in the middle of the floor, trying and failing to direct everything. Her hair was slightly out of place, her eyes wild, her voice cracking as she snapped orders. Offer vouchers, she barked. Tell them we had a delivery issue. This is temporary. Ellie stood quietly near the espresso machine, doing her job, but not rushing to solve Sabrina's problems. When Daniel pushed through the door, people turned on him like he was the face of the disaster. You're the manager, right? A man demanded. Under the old system, this place never ran out. Since you changed ownership, it's been downhill. Daniel's stomach twisted. We're just having a supply hiccup, he said. We're restructuring. Then restructure faster, the customer said coldly, or we'll stop coming. He grabbed his half refund and left. Inside the small office, away from the customers, Sabrina slammed the door behind them and thrust the court papers toward Daniel's chest. You need to fix this, she hissed. Now! Daniel's hands shook as he held the envelope. I'm trying, he said. It's not that simple. Not that simple? Sabrina's voice rose. You told me she was naive. You told me she barely knew how the business worked. You told me she was just some quiet baker with a logo. In the corner, Gavin Pierce, 33, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He had been called in, hoping he'd help mediate with suppliers and staff. He had watched enough. Daniel, Gavin said, voice flat, you did this to yourself. Daniel spun toward him. Don't start, Gavin. I need you to talk to Dorian. Smooth things over. Explain. Explain what? Gavin snapped. That you cheated on your wife, tried to hand her family business to your mistress, siphoned cash, and assumed she was too weak to notice? Sabrina flinched. Daniel's face flushed red. This is between us. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Gavin stepped forward, eyes burning. I understand perfectly. I was there the night you called her soft. I was there when you said, she'll sign anything. He hesitated, then added quietly, and I was the one who texted her to check the accounts. Daniel blinked. Sabrina's head snapped toward him. You did what? Gavin didn't look away. I warned her because someone had to. You used her trust like it was a tool. I'm done watching that. He shoved his hands into his pockets and headed for the door. You're walking away? Daniel shouted. I should have walked away sooner, Gavin replied, and left without looking back. A few minutes later, the back door swung open again. Lydia Marlowe, 58, marched in, her tight blouse slightly wrinkled, hair pinned back too hard. Anger radiated off her like heat. What have you done? She demanded, looking between Daniel and Sabrina. I've had friends calling me all morning, customers complaining, staff quitting, people talking about fraud and court and Elena. Daniel rubbed his temples. I'm dealing with it, Mom. Clearly not, she snapped. She turned on Sabrina. You told my son you knew what you were doing. You told him transferring the bakery was smart. Sabrina's voice cracked. Your son told me she was clueless. He said she didn't own much. He said the contracts were simple. He said I'd be the new face, and he'd stand beside me. You both used her, Lydia spat, her voice shaking. You both took her for granted. And now you're shocked she's fighting? She fed you, Daniel. She carried this house when you couldn't even keep a job. The words cut deeper than any lawyer's paragraph. Daniel slammed his fist on the desk. Stop acting like she's a saint. Lydia stepped back, eyes filling with tears. I'm not saying she's a saint, she whispered. I'm saying she didn't deserve you doing this to her. The room fell silent. In the hallway just outside, Jonas Reed walked calmly, a clipboard in one hand, a small body camera discreetly clipped inside his jacket. Marcy had arranged for him to enter as an external auditor sent by Elena's legal team to observe the transition. He wasn't hiding. Staff had seen him. Management knew his name. But they didn't realize he was recording, not private whispers in bathrooms or behind closed doors, but everything said in office spaces and work areas where people shouted accusations without thinking. Note, Jonas murmured quietly into his mic. Staff, suppliers, and even family openly characterized Daniel's actions as reckless and deceitful. Conflicts show breakdown of leadership and intention to push blame instead of take responsibility. Through the office window, he watched Daniel sink into a chair, rubbing his face, as Sabrina paced like a trapped animal. Outside the branch, Clara stood with a tablet, updating Jerome. Franchise partners are emailing, Clara said. They're angry they weren't told about ownership changes. Some are freezing their own payments until this is settled. They're saying the new regime is ruining the brand. Jerome's voice came through the speaker. Good. The more evidence we have that they mishandled control, the easier it is to prove harm and instability. Customers yelled in the background. Staff looked exhausted. The once warm, steady energy of the bakery had turned chaotic under Daniel and Sabrina's leadership. Inside the office, a young staff member knocked timidly and handed Daniel a white envelope. This just arrived, she said. His fingers were clumsy as he opened it. This time it wasn't just a notice. It was a formal court summons with a scheduled date. Defendant, Daniel Marlowe. Co-defendant, Sabrina Cole. Allegations, fraudulent activity, coerced contract signing, misrepresentation of authority, misuse of intellectual property. Sabrina read over his shoulder. Her face went completely pale. She's really doing this, Sabrina whispered. She's dragging us in front of a judge. Daniel stared at the paper, his pulse roaring in his ears. He had thought he was gaming a naive woman with a cute job. Now he understood that Elena wasn't just fighting back. She was pulling the truth into the brightest light possible. A courtroom. Scene 9, revised, the courtroom reckoning. Weeks later, the intensity returned in a new form. A packed courtroom. The echo of footsteps. The hum of whispers. The cold, polished wood. Reporters lined the back row, pens ready. Former employees, suppliers, and franchise owners filled the benches. Some glared at Daniel and Sabrina. Others looked at Elena with quiet sympathy. At the defense table, Daniel sat in a wrinkled suit that no longer fit as well as it once did. His eyes were hollow from sleepless nights. Sabrina's once perfect posture had crumbled. She stared down at the table, fingers twisting a tissue until it tore. Lydia sat behind them, shoulders bowed, as if the shame weighed more than her body could carry. On the other side, Elena sat beside Jerome Howe. She wore a simple black dress, hair in a low bun, minimal makeup. No attempt to look like a power CEO, yet when she walked in, the room had gone quieter. She didn't wear power, she carried it. The bailiff called, "All rise." Judge Romero, early 60s, firm expression, took his seat. He was known for a low tolerance for lies and a calm, surgical way of cutting to the heart of a case. "You may be seated," he said. "Counsel, proceed." Jerome stood buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, today we present a case of financial misconduct, abuse of trust, and coercion," he said. "This is not just the story of a wife and husband. It is the story of an owner whose quiet nature was used as a weapon against her." He held up the signed transfer contract. "Exhibit A," he said. "The document the defendants claim gave them rights over the Hale and Hearth bakery chain. It was signed after threats of financial ruin, without independent legal counsel, and accompanied by false claims about creditors." He placed it on the evidence table. "Exhibit B," he continued, lifting printed spreadsheets, "unauthorized transfers from operating accounts to a shell company, Cole Holdings and Development, controlled by Miss Sabrina Cole." He let the words settle. "And Exhibit C," he said, "a set of recordings and emails that show intent, not confusion, not error, but intent to strip Mrs. Marlowe of her business." He stepped back. The defense lawyer tried to argue stress, bad advice, and miscommunication, but the judge raised a hand. "Save it for your turn," he said. "I want to see the evidence." Witnesses were called. First, Clara Benson. "Mrs. Benson," Jerome asked, "how long have you known the Hale family?" "Over 20 years, she answered. "I worked with Margaret Hale, and later with Elena." "Did Margaret plan the business structure with one signature in mind?" he asked. "No," Clara said firmly. "She insisted everything vital, the recipes, trademarks, logo, and brand, be in Elena's personal name. The company only licenses those rights. That way, no one could quietly take the heart of the business." A murmur rippled through the room. Next, Dorian Blake took the stand. He removed his cap respectfully. "Margaret told me once, if anyone ever comes trying to take what's mine from Elena, you call her, not them. When I got that enforcement notice from Elena, I honored it. That's why I halted supplies." Then Marcy spoke, anger controlled but visible, as she described the email thread about firing long-term staff once new ownership kicked in. Then Ellie testified, eyes wide but voice steady, recounting what she heard outside the office door. "Daniel said, 'Once the bakery is in your name, we finally get money worth having,' she said. He sounded proud." Gavin came next. He admitted to sending Elena the anonymous text. "I'd seen enough," he said. "I warned her to check the accounts because I knew he was using her trust. I should have said more sooner." Finally, Jonas took the stand, presenting his compiled timeline of financial transfers in the shell company registration. "We see a pattern, B," Jonas said. "Transfers into Cole Holdings, attempts to change supplier routes, and a rapid push for control once Mrs. Marlowe was pressured into signing." Then came the recording, the one where Daniel's voice said, "She'll sign. She's too soft to fight back." And Sabrina's voice answered, "Once the bakery is in my name, we take everything." Silence filled the room. Even the defense lawyer closed his eyes for a moment. Jerome then pulled out a single older document. "The heart of all of this," he said, "is this deed." He handed it to the judge. "This is the original intellectual property deed for the Hale and Hearth brand," he said, "signed by Margaret Hale, naming Elena Hale Marlowe as sole owner of all trademarks, recipes, and brand elements for her lifetime." Judge Romero read it carefully. Then he looked up at Daniel. "Mr. Marlowe," he said, voice heavy, "do you have anything to say?" Daniel stood, shaking. I made mistakes," he stammered. "I was under pressure. I thought we were going to lose everything and that she wouldn't understand." "Did you coerce your wife into signing this contract?" the judge asked. Daniel swallowed. I told her things were worse than they were. I made it sound like we had no choice." "And you, Ms. Cole?" the judge asked. Sabrina's eyes overflowed. "I trusted what he told me," she said. "I wanted a bigger life. I didn't think." "That much is clear," the judge said sharply. He set the contract down with a firm hand. "In light of the evidence presented," Judge Romero declared, This court finds that the transfer contract was obtained under coercion and misrepresentation. It is hereby voided. Daniel sagged. Furthermore, the judge continued, the intellectual property rights, including trademarks, recipes, and brand usage, remain solely with Mrs. Elena Hale Marlowe as originally structured. Murmurs rushed through the room. Some people smiled. Others clapped hands over their mouths. As for Mr. Marlowe and Ms. Cole, he said, voice unyielding, this court finds sufficient evidence of fraudulent behavior and misuse of company funds. You are ordered to repay damages to Mrs. Marlowe and to the company. The total amount will be determined based on the financial analysis presented, but I suspect you'll find it heavy. He struck the gavel once. Daniel's lawyer whispered something panicked in his ear. Sabrina stared straight ahead as if she couldn't process any of it. Jerome turned to Elena and gave a small nod. It was over, legally at least. As the room erupted in low, buzzing conversation, Daniel stumbled from his seat and crossed the space between the tables. Elena, he said hoarsely, please, please, I'm begging you. The bailiff began to move forward, but Judge Romero raised a hand, watching. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. I can't survive this without you, he said. You won. You proved your point. Just don't leave me. The entire courtroom seemed to lean in. Elena looked at him with a calm he had never really seen before. She took a breath, and as she opened her mouth to speak, the scene cut. Before a single word left her lips, the intensity carried on to the courthouse steps. The sun was bright, almost too bright for such a heavy day. Reporters swarmed, microphones extended, questions flung into the air. Elena, will you take him back? Elena, are you pressing criminal charges? Elena, did you always know you'd win? She kept walking, not fast, not running, just steady. Ruth walked a step behind her like a quiet guardian. Marcy and Ellie followed, flanking her like loyal pillars. Jerome stayed slightly to the side, giving her space. Then a hand grabbed her wrist. Elena, please, Daniel choked out. Cameras froze. Microphones lowered. Conversations paused mid-word. He had stopped her in front of the entire crowd. Elena, he repeated, voice raw. Don't walk away, not like this. She turned slowly. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped. The confident man who'd once mocked her little bakery looked impossibly small. I know I was wrong, he said, words tumbling over each other. I was selfish. I listened to the wrong people. I didn't see your value. I never understood what you really did. But now I see it. I swear I see it. The desperation in his voice squeezed something in her chest. But it did not change her. Daniel, she said quietly, you didn't just fail to see my value. You tried to erase it. There's a difference. His lower lip trembled. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll stay away from Sabrina. She shook her head. This isn't about signing a few more papers, she said. You didn't trip and fall into betrayal. You walked there, step by step, and pulled someone else with you. He dropped to his knees on the public stone steps, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the whispers. I can't do this without you, he said. You're the only person who ever believed in me. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, not for what he was now, but for what he had wasted. I believed in you, she said softly, and you used that belief as a tool. That's not love, Daniel. That's convenience. Behind her, she felt Ruth's silent support, a gentle presence at her back. Marcy's jaw was clenched, as if she was holding back her own words. Ellie clutched the strap of her bag, eyes wet. Elena, Daniel whispered, I'm begging you, don't leave me. You left me a long time ago, she replied, voice barely above a whisper. You left when you chose secrets over honesty, when you chose greed over loyalty, when you chose humiliation over partnership. He reached for her hand again, but she stepped back. You say you can't survive this without me, she said. You survived just fine while destroying me. You'll survive this, just not with me beside you. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Then Elena turned. One step, then another. Every step felt like removing a chain. The reporters surged to follow, but Jerome and Marcy created a subtle barrier, keeping them from crowding her. Ruth's pace matched hers exactly. At the bottom of the steps, Elena paused and looked back only once. Daniel was still on his knees, shoulders shaking, his mother standing behind him with a hand on his shoulder, her face etched with regret. Sabrina stood off to the side, alone, phone clutched in her hand. Not as a weapon now, but as a lifeline she no longer knew how to use. Elena turned away for the last time. Later that evening, when the noise died down, Elena drove alone to the bakery headquarters. The building was calm, lights dimmed, only a few staff finishing closing tasks. They nodded respectfully as she passed, their eyes different now. They didn't just see a consultant anymore. They saw the woman who had protected their jobs, their brand, their work. She walked down the hallway to the door from scene 1. The brass plate still read, Archives. She took a small gold key from a chain around her neck, the one she had worn for years without anyone asking what it opened. The lock clicked softly. Inside, the room smelled like paper and faint lavender, the scent her grandmother had loved. Filing cabinets lined the walls. A large wooden desk sat under the window, worn at the edges. Beneath the desk was a heavy safe. Elena knelt, entered the code Margaret had whispered into her hand years ago, and listened as the safe unlocked with a satisfying, deep click. Inside were folders tied with ribbon, leather-bound portfolios, rolled deeds, and envelopes neatly labeled in her grandmother's careful handwriting. She pulled one envelope out. Hale and Hearth, Intellectual Property and Brand. She smiled sadly. She already knew this one now. Then another caught her eye. Other holdings, for Elena when she's ready. Her breath caught. She opened it and found stock certificates in companies she recognized, property deeds in neighborhoods being developed, a trust statement with her name on it, untouched, and a letter, yellowed at the edges. My dear Elena, this world will try to reduce you to what it can easily describe, a job, a title, a role beside someone else. But you are bigger than any role. If you are reading this, then you have been hurt. Let this be your reminder. I did not build this so that anyone could take it from you. I built it so that you would never have to beg anyone for your worth. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Not this time. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then returned it to the safe. For the first time since all of this began, she didn't feel like she was fighting for what little she had. She finally understood how much she had always held. As she turned to leave the archive room, the hallway light flickered. A shadow moved just beyond the doorway. She froze. Elena, a calm, familiar voice said from the hall, there's something else your grandmother left for you. Something she asked someone to keep until you were ready. She stepped into the hallway slowly. The figure stood at the end, half in shadow. Someone who had known Margaret before Elena ever understood contracts and trademarks. The screen of this story would fade before revealing their face. But one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead wasn't about survival anymore. It was about legacy. Far down the quiet hallway, as the building settled for the night, it was as if a whisper lingered in the air. This was how it ended.